The bobcat wasn't moving. She lay curled in a faded thermal blanket, her thin sides barely rising, her breath a soft, uneven rasp. Her ears twitched once, then went still again. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of an old refrigerator and the slow, steady beat of a woman's heart, because that woman was holding the animal against her chest, wrapped inside her fleece jacket, her hands cradling the tiny creature like a second heartbeat. Claire Maddox hadn't slept in 23 hours. Her eyes were rimmed red, not from exhaustion, but from the quiet ache that crept in when you've done everything. Everything. And it still might not be enough. Maple, that was the name they'd given her. The name Claire had whispered to her on the second night, when the kitten made the faintest chirp in her sleep. Now, Maple was silent, still. A tiny wild thing who had no idea she was being fought for. Claire's voice broke the silence. "You don't get to give up now," she murmured. "Not after everything. Not after the excavator. Not after the tube feeds and the night you bit me for the first time. Not after the shirt."
Vitals are stable for now.
She adjusted the blanket, making sure the frayed collar of the old red flannel shirt was still within reach of the bobcat's nose. Maple always settled when she smelled that shirt. It had belonged to Roy, the man who'd found her. Claire looked toward the photo taped on the fridge. It was blurry and badly lit, but she'd taken it the night Maple had arrived. The kitten was barely visible, half buried in a nest of heating pads and surgical towels. But her eyes, even then, held something defiant, something wild. She closed her own eyes, breathing slowly, syncing her breath with the rhythm of the little body pressed against her. "Come back, Maple." She didn't expect a miracle, not tonight. But then again, Maple had never done anything the way they expected. It started in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where the road ends in gravel, and the air smells like old timber and diesel. Roy Dempsey had worked 100 sites like it. Former logger, now doing cleanup contracts in the quieter corners of British Columbia. That morning, the air was thick with dust and sun glare. The sawmill had been abandoned for years, and his crew was clearing out the last of the collapsed foundation. He was in the cab of a track loader, half listening to country radio, when his radio crackled to life. "Roy, you might want to take a look at this." "What now?" he muttered, setting the controls to idle. He climbed down, boots crunching over broken plywood and insulation. One of the younger guys, Lucas, was kneeling by a pile of debris, his face pale. "I thought it was a rat at first," Lucas said. "But it's something else." Roy crouched beside him, brushing aside a slab of splintered paneling. Then he saw it. A tiny body. Spotted fur, crusted with grime. Ears with black tufts. She wasn't moving, but her eyes were open, glassy and blinking slow. Her front legs were splayed at odd angles, useless. She was dragging herself forward with her chin, leaving a faint red trail across the plywood. A bobcat. "Jesus," Roy whispered. He looked down at his gloves, then back at the kitten. She weighed nothing. He could feel the cold of her body, even through the heat of the sun. He'd scooped her up with the loader. God, she'd been in that pile of debris, 30 feet in the air. If he'd dumped the load a second later, she'd be gone. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped her gently, holding her close to his chest. Lucas stood silent. "What do we do?" he asked. Roy didn't hesitate. "We call Claire." He'd heard about her from a wildlife officer a few years back. She ran a sanctuary out past the old logging roads, where phone signal was weak and the rules were looser. They called it Silver Fern, a rehab center for animals the world didn't make room for anymore. He dialed. When she picked up, he didn't bother with a greeting. "Claire, I've got a problem. It's bad. It's a bobcat kitten, and she's hurt real bad." There was a pause. Then Claire's voice, calm and low. "Where are you?" By the time she pulled up in her battered truck, Roy was waiting by the gate, holding the cardboard box like it was made of glass. Claire opened it, and her breath caught. "She's freezing," she murmured, already reaching for the emergency kit in her truck. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Her hands moved fast. Blanket, warm water bottle, tiny glucose dropper. Roy watched her work. "Is she gonna make it?" Claire didn't look up. "I don't know yet. But we try. That's what we do." She buckled the carrier into her truck and turned the heat to high. Then she looked at Roy. "You did good calling me." He nodded, jaw tight. "Didn't feel like it." Claire's eyes softened. "None of us ever find them early. But you didn't leave her there. That counts for something." She climbed in and drove off, dust kicking up behind her. Roy stood there a long time after she was gone, staring at the place where the kitten had been. The sun kept rising. The machine stayed silent. The road to Silver Fern twisted through a patchwork of forest and mist, where the morning sun hadn't yet cut through the damp mountain air. Claire drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on the pet carrier beside her. Inside, the kitten made no sound. Claire kept glancing over, half expecting to see her gone. But there was still that faint rise and fall. Barely. She whispered to the carrier, not caring if it was for the kitten or herself. "Almost there, little one. Just hold on a little longer." Silver Fern wasn't much to look at from the outside. A repurposed ranger station and a handful of outbuildings tucked into a narrow valley where a satellite signal came and went like mountain wind. But inside, it was a sanctuary in the truest sense, quiet, clean, and pulsing with the low hum of healing. Claire carried the box straight into the clinic, flicked on the overhead lamp, and set the kitten down on a heated mat. "Vitals first," she murmured. She ran a practiced finger over the kitten's gums. White, dangerously pale. The thermometer beeped. Hypothermic. She weighed barely over 400 grams. Every rib showed. Fleas swarmed over her, and there was something worse, a foul smell that hinted at infection. Claire didn't flinch. She just got to work. She gave her subcutaneous fluids, started antibiotics, and used a syringe to offer a blend of electrolytes and warmed formula. The kitten didn't even resist. That scared her more than a hiss or scratch ever could. She didn't call her Maple yet. Not officially. But the name was already planted in her head. An hour later, and her Harlan arrived. The sanctuary's on-call vet, gray-bearded and slow-moving, but sharp as ever. He leaned over the kitten. "This one's deep in the red zone." Claire nodded. "We're calling her the Almost Gone." Harlan ran labs, reviewed the x-rays. The results were worse than expected. "Full parasite load," he said. "Salmonella, severe anemia, guts a mess. You sure you want to keep fighting this one?" Claire didn't answer right away. She just reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, folded blanket, the same thermal she'd used on a raccoon 3 winters ago. She wrapped it around the kitten again. "I'll fight until she tells me to stop," she said quietly. He didn't argue. That night, Claire began the routine. Every 2 hours, she syringe-fed the kitten, cleaned her, changed out the heat packs. She wore a homemade ghillie hood, a ridiculous getup of camo mesh and fake moss, to keep the kitten from imprinting on her face. Human voices meant non-releasable. She kept her mouth shut, even when Maple whimpered. Feeding took 15 minutes. Cleanup, 20. She'd sleep 40 minutes, then start again. By the third night, her back ached and her wrists throbbed from the fine motor work. But the kitten's body was warmer. Her breathing, just a little steadier. She still couldn't stand. Her front legs flopped outward like wet noodles. Every time Claire tried to tuck them beneath her chest, they collapsed again. Could be nerve damage, Harlan had said. Or starvation. Or a birth defect. We won't know for weeks. Claire didn't wait weeks to start. She began physical therapy on day 4. Tiny, repetitive stretches, slow massages to reawaken muscle memory. When she set the kitten down and let go, the little body would crumple. But then something strange would happen. Maple would drag herself forward. Not with her legs, with her chin. She'd press her tiny face into the mat and scrape forward, a ½ inch at a time. Claire sat there, stunned. And then she smiled for the first time in days. "Okay," she whispered. "You're not done. Neither am I." Maple survived the first week. Then the second. She didn't purr, not like a house cat would. But Claire learned to recognize her signs. A twitch of the ear, a chirp like a sparrow when the feeding was done just right. The way her eyes followed the red flannel shirt wherever it went. That shirt had become Maple's blanket now. Claire had folded it twice, laid it in her incubator, and watched as the kitten curled into it with a strange sort of trust. She didn't know what it meant to Maple, only that it worked. Some nights, Claire left the clinic door cracked open just so she could hear the rhythm of that faint chirping in the dark. One evening, Jess, one of the junior volunteers, peeked into the clinic and whispered, "How's our little ghost?" Claire held up a hand to signal silence. She was crouched low in her ghillie suit, guiding a syringe past Maple's tiny jaw. The Bobcat drank 2 full milliliters before turning her head slightly, eyes blinking. Claire eased back slowly, watching. Jess whispered again, "She's starting to notice you?" "No," Claire mouthed. "She's noticing the shirt." Jess grinned, then quietly left. The protocol remained strict. No voices, no eye contact. The goal was release, not dependence. But something unspoken was growing. The kitten was gaining weight, gaining spark. Her chirps became more frequent, her muscles more stable. On the 15th day, Claire walked into the clinic and froze. Maple was standing, wobbly, trembling, but standing. The flannel shirt lay beneath her paws, bunched like a nest. Her head lifted when she saw Claire, or the bush, as she still knew it, and she let out a chirp that was startlingly loud. Claire didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood, hidden behind the ghillie veil, her throat tight. Later that night, she called Dr. Harlan. "You won't believe this," she said. "I probably will," he replied. "She's standing?" "Yes, on her own," Harlan chuckled. "Told you she had that stubborn streak. I've seen it before. Mountain-born animals. They come wired different." Claire looked out the clinic window. Snow still clung to the distant peaks, even as early spring thawed the valley. In the days that followed, Maple transformed. She began playing, at first tentatively, swatting at threads on the flannel, then chasing shadows on the wall. Claire introduced toys, balls with bells, scent pouches filled with dried pine, even a little log to help build balance. But it was an old, threadbare stuffed fox, pulled from a box of donated items, that captured Maple's heart. Twice her size, faded orange, one ear missing. Maple pounced it, dragged it, slept on it. She chirped at it, groomed it. It became her companion, her rival, her pillow. Claire started calling it the fox, Everyone else just called it his shirt, because Maple dragged it around like she had the flannel, like it carried a scent she couldn't forget. By mid-May, she was strong enough to move out of the incubator and into a transitional enclosure, what they called the nursery pen. Half indoor, half outdoor, covered in pine shavings and sunlight. She chirped at birds, climbed the stump posts, kicked pine cones like a soccer ball. But at night, when the lights dimmed and the wind slipped cold through the valley, Maple always curled up the same way, nose pressed against the flannel shirt, one paw resting on the fox's tattered tail. Claire never spoke during those moments, but sometimes, when no one was looking, she'd kneel beside the pen's outer wall, place her hand flat to the wood, and just breathe. The kitten was wild, but the bond, that silent, growing thread, was something else entirely. And that, Claire knew, was going to make everything harder when the time came to let her go. The crash came on a quiet Tuesday. Claire had just finished feeding a raccoon kit in the south barn when she noticed the silence. The kind that didn't feel peaceful. The kind that warned you something had gone still. She dropped the syringe and ran. Inside the clinic, Maple was lying on her side, not moving. Her breath came in sharp, rattling puffs. Her body was limp, her gums ghost white. The red flannel had been pushed aside, untouched. Claire didn't think. She acted. She unzipped her jacket, scooped the tiny bobcat into her arms, and pressed her to her chest, skin to fur, heart to heart. She sat down on the clinic floor, jacket wrapped around them both, cradling Maple as if sheer warmth could rewind whatever had begun. Her voice cracked. "Not now. Don't do this now." She called Harlan. He didn't pick up. She called Jess and left a message. "Clinic, emergency." Then she sat and waited. Minutes passed. The fridge hummed. The wall clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a raven called once and fell silent. Claire whispered, "You don't get to quit. Not after the fox. Not after standing. Not after choosing that shirt every single night." She adjusted the jacket tighter and felt the small body twitch. Just once. Barely there. But it was enough. 3 hours passed. When Jess burst in, her boots skidding across the tile, Claire looked up with tired, bloodshot eyes. She didn't say a word, because just then, from under her jacket, came a sound, a chirp. Weak, raspy, but undeniably Maple. Claire exhaled so hard it turned into a laugh and a sob all at once. "Welcome back, little bird." That night, Harlan arrived with stronger antibiotics and a portable oxygen setup. The salmonella had likely flared into a full-blown septicemia. It was a coin flip, even with intervention. But Maple had already beaten odds bigger than this. Claire kept her jacket unzipped for the next 2 nights. The flannel shirt was kept inside it, pressed between her chest and the kitten. She didn't use the ghillie suit. Not anymore. That part was over. Maple knew her. By the weekend, she was eating again. Slowly, then stronger. The spark returned to her eyes, and with it, the mischievous pounce that had become her signature. She would chirp now whenever Claire walked near the enclosure. A staccato, joyful burst that echoed through the rafters. Jess called it her song. "It's like she's singing at sunrise," she said. "Like those birds that wake the whole woods." Claire didn't correct her. She couldn't. Because deep down, she knew what the sound really was. It was gratitude. 1 week later, Claire came into the clinic to find Maple curled beside the fox again. The red flannel pulled half over her like a blanket. She had one paw stretched forward, resting gently across the fabric. And for the first time in over a month, Claire allowed herself to believe it, really, fully believe it. Maple was going to live. She'd survived the excavator, the infection, the weakness. She'd chosen to fight, chosen to stay. But the hardest part wasn't over. It was just beginning. Because Maple was growing stronger every day, and the stronger she got, the closer they came to the question Claire had been pushing away since the moment she held that cardboard box in her hands. Could Maple ever go back to the wild? And if she couldn't, what then? Spring turned to summer, and the mountains bloomed with color. Wildflowers pushed through the cracks in the trail paths. The creek behind the sanctuary swelled with meltwater, and Maple became a whirlwind. She'd grown into a compact little force of nature, still small for her age, but fast, fierce, and full of spirit. She tore across her nursery pen like a miniature storm, scaling the stump tower, chirping at squirrels, ambushing her stuffed fox like it owed her money. Jess joked one day, "She's like a pocket-sized predator with the attitude of a queen." Claire just smiled. That nickname, the Pocket Queen, stuck around. But beneath the joy, Claire couldn't ignore the facts. Maple wasn't growing right. She was nearly 6 months old, but still weighed less than 7 pounds. Her legs had muscle now, but her body looked disproportionate. Large head, thin frame. She tired easily after short bursts of play. And something else too. She never finished her meals, especially when the prey changed. Dr. Harlan ran more tests, blood work, nutrient panels, scans. Everything was inconclusive. "It could just be that she's small," he said. "Not all bobcats grow into textbook profiles. But something's off. I can feel it too." Still, they kept training her, kept preparing her for release. Then in early August, another call came in. A hiker had found a second bobcat kitten, same age as Maple, healthy, big, loud. She'd been dehydrated, but otherwise strong. They brought her in and named her Cedar. Cedar was everything Maple wasn't. Bold, perfectly built, cautious, but fearless. She ate whole prey without hesitation. Climbed the trees in the exercise yard by day 3. Her eyes burned with the instinct to run, and not just for fun, but to hunt, to survive. Claire hesitated before introducing them. Maple had never seen another of her kind. What if she rejected Cedar? Or worse, what if she imprinted more deeply on humans after the contrast? But the decision was made. They placed Cedar in a separate quarantine enclosure for 3 weeks, then brought her into Maple's pen on a crisp September morning. Claire watched from the shadows, breath held. Cedar bounded in, a streak of fluffy golden fur. Maple hissed instantly, a high, wheezing sound of warning. Cedar paused. Then, in an almost comical move, she plodded forward and gently booped Maple on the nose. Maple looked outraged. She swatted. Cedar swatted back, gently. Then, after a full minute of staring, Maple turned and walked away with dramatic disapproval. But by nightfall, they were curled up in a pile of pine shavings and torn flannel, the fox wedged between them. It worked. More than that, it changed everything. Cedar brought out a wildness in Maple that Claire hadn't seen before. A confidence. They played rough, chased each other through the tunnels, wrestled in the tall grass. Maple still tired faster, but she lasted longer with Cedar's encouragement. For the first time, Claire thought, maybe, just maybe. But the hope didn't last. 2 weeks later, they transitioned both cats to a whole prey diet, the final step before wild release. Fresh rabbits, quail, small rodent carcasses, everything a bobcat would need to hunt and survive alone. Cedar took to it like she'd been born in the woods. Maple didn't. She tried. God, she tried. She'd stalk the rabbit, make the kill, even start eating, but always walked away after a few bites. Her appetite dropped, her weight stalled, then dropped again. Claire pulled her from the release program and ran full diagnostics. This time, the scans showed it all. "It's her pelvis," Harlan said, tapping the screen. "Malformed, congenital, narrower than it should be, dangerously so." Claire stared at the glowing image. "So what does that mean?" she asked, already knowing. "It means she can't pass fur or bone. Any hard prey matter will impact her intestines. She's been starving off and on her whole life. She just hid it well." Silence fell, a long, aching silence. Finally, Harlan spoke again. "Claire, she can't go back. Not like this. She'll die out there." Claire closed her eyes. "And if it's genetic, we can't risk passing this on either." Harlan nodded. "Exactly." Outside the clinic, the late summer breeze moved through the pines. Birds called from the far end of the enclosure. Maple let out a single, lonely chirp. Claire opened her eyes. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her voice was a whisper. "We tell her tomorrow." They called a meeting that afternoon. Claire, Dr. Harlan, Jess, and the sanctuary's small advisory board. It was short. There wasn't much to debate. Maple's diagnosis meant only one thing. She was non-releasable. She would never survive in the wild. Her malformed pelvis, the inability to digest bones and fur. It wasn't just a dietary issue. It was a fatal flaw for a predator. And then there was the ethical question. If this was a genetic defect, sending her into the gene pool was a risk. A quiet but permanent one. The vote was unanimous. Maple would stay. Claire sat on the porch after, staring at the tree line where the enclosure path began. She didn't say anything for a long time. Just listened to the wind. Jess sat beside her. Her eyes were red. "It's just, she tried so hard," Jess whispered. "She fought harder than any of them." Claire nodded. "She doesn't know we were working toward release. She just knows we were working." Jess wiped her face. "What do we do now?" Claire took a deep breath. "Now we give her a different kind of freedom." They began building the permanent enclosure that same week. A full quarter-acre habitat nestled in the woods behind silver fern. It had climbing towers, logs for scent marking, shaded dens, and a custom heated shelter for the winters. And in one sunny corner, beneath a leaning pine, they placed a flat rock and folded the faded red flannel shirt beneath it. Maple moved in on a rainy October morning. Claire walked her there herself, not in a carrier, but wrapped in her arms like the first night. Jess opened the gate. Maple sniffed the air, chirped once, and then trotted forward, tail flicking. She explored for a long time, climbing, rubbing against the bark, chirping at a raven that landed on the fence post. Then, just before dusk, she dragged the fox toy into the flannel nest and curled up on top of it. Claire watched from the gate. She didn't go in. This was Maple's world now. Cedar, meanwhile, was nearly unrecognizable. She'd grown into a sleek, powerful adolescent, 14 pounds of wild instinct and precision. She passed every milestone. Her release was set for early November. On the morning of Cedar's release, Claire drove deep into protected wilderness, far beyond the sanctuary, beyond the logging roads. Jess rode with her, Cedar resting quietly in the crate between them. When they reached the clearing, the air was sharp and clean, full of pine and distant river. Claire opened the crate. Cedar paused for a single breath. Then she leapt, vanishing into the underbrush without a sound, like she'd never been anything but wild. Claire stood there, hands on the empty crate, eyes wet. Jess put a hand on her shoulder. Bittersweet, huh? Claire nodded. Exactly the word. They drove back in silence. When they returned, Maple was perched on her favorite stump in the corner of her new home, fox toy under one paw. She looked up, chirped twice, then resumed shredding a pine cone with violent joy. Claire smiled. Guess what, girl? You're the queen now. That night, Claire opened her inbox and found messages from all over the country. The sanctuary's live stream, the one they'd quietly installed in Maple's new space, had gone viral. Thousands of people were watching the tiny bobcat, watching her stalk butterflies, watching her chirp for her soft meals, watching her sleep curled around her ragged fox and old flannel nest. A retired firefighter from Montana had written, "Watching her reminds me that some battles are worth fighting, even if the ending isn't what we planned." A woman in hospice in Vermont sent this. "I can't leave my bed anymore, but I watch Maple every morning. She makes me feel like I'm still in the woods." Claire read them all. She cried, not because Maple couldn't go free, but because she already had, in a different way. She hadn't become a wild predator. She'd become something else, a symbol, a survivor, a tiny monarch in her own quiet kingdom, the kind of story people don't just watch, they carry with them. Claire turned off the computer and stepped out into the cold. Somewhere behind the trees, Maple chirped into the night. It echoed like birdsong at dawn. 1 year to the day after Roy Dempsey found her in a crumpled heap beneath a collapsed sawmill wall, Maple turned 2. Claire didn't tell anyone at first. She didn't want to make it a big deal. Didn't want cameras or fundraisers or hashtags, but Jess found out. And then Harlan. And before long, the entire sanctuary was buzzing with quiet plans. They called it a Bobcat party, though there were no streamers or cupcakes. Instead, they built a cardboard fortress in Maple's enclosure, full of tunnels and shredded newspaper. They hid cinnamon-scented pine cones and frozen broth treats in the hollow logs. They even stitched the fox toy back together with waxed twine, stuffing it with herbs and a bit of cedar shavings from her nursery pen. Claire arrived just before dawn. A fresh snowfall had dusted the treetops, and the air smelled like pine and wood smoke. Maple was already awake. She chirped twice and stood at the gate like royalty awaiting her staff. When the door opened, she darted toward the cardboard fortress, pouncing, tearing, kicking snow into the air with wild delight. The fox flew across the pen. Pine cones exploded under her paws. Jess laughed. She's like a wild kid on Christmas morning. Claire just watched, hands tucked deep in her coat pockets, a soft smile on her face. "You know," Harlan said beside her, holding his coffee with both hands. "I looked back at her intake photos this morning. The ones from the clinic. The chin scraping, the eyes, flat as glass." Claire nodded slowly. "I remember." He gestured toward the bobcat now bouncing through a pile of shredded boxes. "And I look at this little monarch, and I think this wasn't a failure." Claire didn't speak for a moment. Then softly, "No, it wasn't." She looked up toward the live stream camera mounted just beyond the enclosure fence. Thousands of people were watching. People in hospitals, people in rehab, people fighting battles nobody saw. Maple had become something none of them expected. Not just a rescue, not just a survivor, but a kind of living reminder. That healing isn't always about returning to what you were. Sometimes It's about becoming something new entirely. Claire stepped to the fence, crouched low. Maple paused mid-pounce and looked over. Their eyes met. And then, as if on cue, Maple padded toward her. She stopped just at the edge, pressed her paw gently against the wood. A slow blink. Claire pressed her palm to the same spot, mirroring her. No words, just breath, just being. The wind rustled through the trees, shaking down snow like falling stars. Claire closed her eyes. "Happy birthday, little queen," she whispered. And in the hush of winter morning, as the world held its breath, Maple chirped once, high and clear, and turned back toward her kingdom.